Yo, what's going on everyone? I'm Jason Schroeder. I'm the tech editor with Vital MTB. We just wrapped up our final day of testing and filming on RockShox, all new automatic suspension system, appropriately named Flight Attendant. It's been an extremely fun few weeks getting to ride this brand new system and understand how it analyzes both rider input as well as the terrain you are riding to provide the best suspension platform at any given moment. All right, let's not waste any time. Let's jump into the details of Flight Attendant. So RockShox has been developing their automatic suspension system for a long time, and the whole goal is to simplify your ride experience when you're out on the trail. Flight Attendant works by using a complex mixture of sensors and algorithms that turn real-time bumps and pedaling forces into the best suspension platform at any given moment. The system is fully automatic and does not require any actions to be taken by the rider. There are no wires, and the Flight Attendant components are AXS enabled, using the same batteries as SRAM AXS drivetrains or Reverb AXS dropper posts. So the components that make up Flight Attendant, there's only three key pieces. You have a fork control module located where normally you would have your compression adjustments. Then on the top of the shock piggyback, you have the rear shock motor module, and then seen from the non-drive side is a pedal sensor in the spindle of your crankset. So the fork control module is the mastermind of the Flight Attendant system. It's collecting data from the sensors in the fork, shock, and the pedal sensor that's in the crank spindle. Both of the sensors on the suspension is what reads impacts and bumps from the terrain you're riding over, and then the sensor from the pedal sensor is what is reading the rider input. So, what cadence you're at when you're pedaling and when you're not. And then all of the components together work to determine what position the bike is in a plane of field, basically which direction the bike's leaning as well as which way it's angled up or going down. All that data is then analyzed by Flight Attendant's algorithm, which can make suspension position decisions every 5 milliseconds to provide the most ideal suspension setup to match both the rider and the demands of the trail. Based on all of these factors, Flight Attendant toggles between its three compression positions: open, pedal, and lock. The positions are labeled on the top of the fork control module, and a green LED light will pulsate to indicate which mode the suspension is currently in while you're riding. So how do each of these three compression positions feel? Well, open and lock are fairly self-explanatory. Open is when Flight Attendant is having no effect on your suspension, so it's allowing the suspension to be the most active, the most plush. Other end of that spectrum is lock. That is when Flight Attendant is in the firmest compression setting. The suspension is going to be the most efficient. And the pedal kind of lands right there in the middle. It's going to be a little bit firmer than open, but still remain a bit more active than lock. So one of the characteristics that makes Flight Attendant unique compared to some of the other automatic suspension systems that are already available is that Flight Attendant does not function once you're either pointed downhill or have not been pedaling for a while and will remain in the open compression position. RockShox did this intentionally so that the descending characteristics of your bike remain the same as they normally would. Flight Attendant only becomes a factor once angled uphill and pedaling, as this is when the system begins to change to either the pedal or lock compression position. So outside of how Flight Attendant performs when you're out on the trail by itself, there are two other modes and features that you can get into, which is manual mode and override mode. Manual mode gives riders the option to switch out of auto mode and cycle between suspension positions at their command. This mode can be accessed via the fork control module or by engaging the assigned paddle of RockShox's new left-hand 2 button controller. So manual mode is a cool feature for riders who, want to have full control of the system, but to be honest, I never used manual mode during testing because I felt that it defeated the whole purpose of having an automatic suspension system. Override mode, on the other hand, gives riders the option to jump directly to their desired compression position by simply holding the assigned paddle on the left-hand controller. So override mode, on the other hand, is a feature that I used a ton during testing. I had override mode set to put the bike in the lock compression setting, And this was super helpful for moments where I just wanted to be able to put the bike in the lock position, knowing that I was gonna have the most efficient pedaling platform. So again, even though Flight Attendant is doing a lot of different suspension tuning for you while you're riding, there are still external adjustments accessible. So on both the fork and shock, you still have external rebound adjustment. And then via the fork control module, you can adjust low speed compression of both the fork and the shock. And then also with that fork control module, you can toggle between different manual modes if you're choosing to ride in that setting. You also can toggle between rider bias adjustments, which is something that we'll get onto later on in this video. Like with all AXS enabled components, Flight Attendant can be customized through the SRAM AXS app. Key features include configuring shifter paddle commands, adjusting low speed compression for the fork and shock, setting rider bias, performing firmware updates, and setting override mode preferences. Lastly, with plenty of colored lights indicating important information, the app includes a helpful key listing out what each color indicates in case you forget. So I'm sure a few of you are wondering, since we are strapping more batteries on our mountain bike, what happens if any of the components of Flight Attendant happen to die while you're on the trail? Are you gonna get stuck in lock mode? Well, the answer is no. Luckily, Flight Attendant, if any of the batteries do die while you're out riding, they will default to the open compression position. All right, so we've covered quite a bit of information here, and hopefully, or maybe some people are just like, cool, I'm sold on Flight Attendant, I wanna go buy it and equip the bike that's sitting next to you right now. Well, unfortunately, RockShox is not going to be selling Flight Attendant as an aftermarket option. Instead, Flight Attendant will be spec'd on select high-end mountain bikes, and you will only be able to get the system if you purchase one of those bikes. So as of right now, there is only a handful of bikes that are gonna be coming spec with Flight Attendant on it. Of course, that list is expected to grow with more brands coming on board, more models of mountain bikes being fitted with Flight Attendant. But basically the main issue that comes up with getting Flight Attendant on a mountain bike is the rear shock motor module and the complexities that come with fitting that to certain suspension designs. Another aspect that complicates making sure that Flight Attendant is going to work with every model mountain bike is that with the rear shock, you now have 3 compression positions. And so that's 3 compression positions that manufacturers can tune to best match the kinematics of an individual suspension design. So as far as which suspension components Flight Attendant is going to be coming spec'd on as of right now, those forks include the Pike Ultimate, the Lyric Ultimate, and the Zeb Ultimate. And the only rear shock is going to be the Super Deluxe Ultimate Air Shock. We tested Flight Attendant on Trek's Enduro bike with a 170mm Zeb Ultimate fork and a Super Deluxe Ultimate rear shock. The Slash is a 160mm travel bike and was a perfect platform to see how Flight Attendant could transform its pedaling capabilities. We'll dive into our time on the Slash a little bit later as well. So as if rolling out a whole new automatic suspension system wasn't already enough, RockShox is also rolling out some key fork updates to all the forks that will be equipped with Flight Attendant. Located at the bottom of both the damper and air spring are 2 rubber pucks that absorb high-frequency vibrations. RockShox refers to these pucks as buttercups, and they make a noticeable difference in reducing the transfer of small bump vibrations from the trail to the rider. The chassis of all 3 fork models have been changed to feature pressure relief valves on the back of the lower legs, which eliminates unwanted air pressure buildup in the lowers caused by changes in altitude or temperature. Found on the inside of the fork lowers by the axle is a new bolt-in hubcap adapters, so riders can use standard hubcaps if they do not have RockShox larger torque caps. And then lastly, the Pike and Lyric chassis also see changes to the lower legs and the CSUs to drop the overall weight of the forks. So there's definitely a lot of information to cover with a whole new system like this, but I think the key to keep in mind is that the ride experience you have while out on the trail remains the same and remains very simple. You know, all of those details and all of the different adjustments the suspension is making is all done, you know, free of mind while you're riding. So transitioning from all the details that make up Flight Attendant and going into how our experience has been actually riding it, our journey riding Flight Attendant originally began with a trip that myself and Vital contributor Johnny Simonetti took down to Colorado Springs, where RockShox's main facility is located. Our time in Colorado was filled with some awesome riding and provided the perfect opportunity to hang with the RockShox crew and gain insight into what their goals were when developing Flight Attendant. We also got to experience firsthand the trails and terrain the system was tested on, and ultimately left with a great initial impression of how Flight Attendant can transform the pedaling efficiency of your mountain bike.
Welcome to Colorado. Thanks for coming out to visit.
Of course.
So we're here on actually one of our favorite rides, which is the Monarch Crest Trail. We actually did this ride quite a few times during the testing of Flight Attendant. We use this to kind of dial in the algorithm and just get a bunch of high altitude riding, a lot of different terrain to kind of just figure out, what we needed to do. So stoked to have you guys here and checking it out today.
Sweet, I'm pumped. Yeah, it's a beautiful day.
It's gonna be an awesome ride, lots of descending, lots of climbing, a little bit of everything. I'm gonna get up to 12,000 feet today, which will be super good. The best advice I can give you for right now, just relax, enjoy the ride, try not to think about it, ride your bike like normal, don't try to do anything different, just ride it like you normally would and let it do the work. So we're about 20 miles into the ride. You feeling good?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we've ridden some cool single track getting here. And I've been on purpose not telling you guys a bunch about what's going on because I kind of wanted you to experience the bike, and then as we get into it, just kind of tell you more what's going on. So what you've been feeling for now, since we started, is basically the suspension moving from either an open to a pedal or a lock mode.
Okay.
Right, so it all depends on what's going on and what you're hitting with the wheels and how hard you're pedaling as to what the suspension is doing. And we're gonna, since we've got some good climbing to go, now you also start to see the efficiency of the Flight Attendant system. So
cool.
Should be cool. So Jason, you've been riding for a while, right? I've had it covered on purpose, so you're not staring at it. What have you noticed so far on the ride?
Well, when you just started going into how there's 3 different settings, that honestly the noise of it is kind of what made me think that there was different settings. It's kind of a different audible noise of it in my head, it's turning between each one.
Sure.
Definitely a very obvious locked out feeling. And then, as you're taking on impacts and compressions, like it is a quick open up. There was probably like 1 or 2 moments even like descending that I could kind of feel it like firm when it was just real smooth and then would go right back into like being fully open.
Yep.
It's crazy. It's a crazy feeling. I don't know. I'm gonna need more time to think about it.
For sure.
And definitely as we kind of go into more details about it, it'll be easier to put those thoughts together. But I bet once we turn the system off and I ride it and I feel that difference of it being locked out like it's been or somewhere in between that to just being none, that's probably when I'll notice it in that sense pedaling. I think more so for me, it's once you're descending, it's basically like a normal bike. Like it's open and working. When I was ascending, it's like, I guess there is that point, like you get to your descent at a more efficient pace, which like on the fire roads and stuff and the stuff that's like small chatter, definitely was an improvement. I mean, we were just chatting up there earlier and kind of just going over like the Slash as a platform, and I didn't realize it was as much travel as it has, which I would probably put that towards having it be locked out most of the time we've been pedaling.
Yeah.
And it's quick though. Like, I think we'll probably get into just the different modes and kind of, I think for me, it's generally been a little too stiff pedaling, but there's flexibility in that.
Yep, for sure. And I think that was the experience was on purpose to have you guys ride a lot of trail, do some descending, oh yeah, the bike feels normal. It feels like a normal bike going downhill, and that actually is the point of the system. We wanted to feel like a normal bike going downhill, but we want it to feel, get that efficiency boost when you're going uphill.
So since we have been back from Colorado and doing testing on our home trails here, the standout characteristic and benefit of running Flight Attendant has been how efficient pedaling the platform is. Just how the system takes both trail impacts and inputs as well as your rider inputs at the pedals and combines that to provide a pedaling platform that is so efficient. I can't think of anything I've ever put on my mountain bike in the past that has had such a drastic improvement to how efficient my bike is. So when does the system, stay in open pedal and lock? What do those situations look like? Well, for the most part, when pedaling, I found that Flight Attendant remains usually in the pedal and lock compression position. The only time that it'll revert to open is, say you're pedaling and you impact like a large rock or root, the system will, open up the fork, maybe open up the shock or put it into the pedal position. If you continue pedaling and no further impacts do occur, it pretty quickly is going to jump you back to that lock position. I think I definitely spent the least amount of time in the pedal compression position. Only real situations where that happened was riding trails that had kind of small, medium-sized bumps consistently, so that the system never had time to get back to that lock position. More often than not, what would happen is a few impacts would occur. If they were of a normal size to kind of unsettle me in the saddle, the system would jump straight to open and remain there if those same type of impacts continued occurring. So when I'm touching on how efficient I felt that Flight Attendant made my ride experience, I think the key point to keep in mind is that we were testing this on a Trek Slash, which is had a 170 Zeb Ultimate up front. It's a 160 millimeter travel bike, and I had to keep reminding myself I was on such a large travel bike, because more often than not I felt like I was pedaling like a 130 or a 140 travel bike. I definitely had more energy when I get to the top of climbs, and then from doing the same test loops that we do fairly often here around Boise, Idaho, my average speed on the Trek Slash with Flight Attendant was faster than other enduro bikes we've tested previously. So touching on how it was to ride Flight Attendant once you're pointed downhill, I again really want to emphasize the importance that Flight Attendants and the system does not have any effect on the suspension once you're either pointed downhill or have not been pedaling for a period of time. This is great because the descending characteristics of the suspension remain the same as if you weren't riding with Flight Attendant. There's no moments of the bike being locked out when you don't want it to be. You can basically guarantee that anytime you're pointing downhill, you're going to be provided supple, plush suspension. So while we are talking descending performance, I definitely have to give a little bit of praise to Trek Slash platform. This is definitely a geared enduro bike, and it's been super fun to ride on descent. It's been one of the more capable bikes I've ridden in recent time. Definitely let me hold on and survive a few situations I probably shouldn't have. With Flight Attendant put on, a bike with the 170 Zeb and a 160 platform, it has gotten me thinking about how close we're getting to having one bike that can kind of do everything. This bike is geared towards descending performance, and now with Flight Attendant on it, its climbing abilities have jumped up quite a bit. And then just touching on, the performance of the suspension pieces themselves, I was super impressed with how both the Zeb Ultimate fork as well as the Super Deluxe rear shock performed. Both provided great mid-stroke support, as well as the initial stroke suppleness was probably one of the standouts. Talking about the fork in particular, I definitely chalk some of that up to the new Buttercup technology that's in them. So, with those rubber pucks mounted at the bottom of the damper, as well as the air spring damper, it took away a lot of that high frequency chatter where typically the fork isn't going to be compressing a whole lot. A perfect example in my mind is kind of riding down like a real chopped up fire road from cars driving over it. Typically the fork isn't going to be really compressing under those super small, quick bumps. With Buttercups, I noticed that there was just less feedback coming through the bike into my body. So outside of just the performance of Flight Attendant while you're out riding on the trails, I've really enjoyed how simple and intuitive the whole system is to use. First off, there are no wires, and the pieces that make up the system are small, clean, and simple, making it hard to really even tell you have Flight Attendant mounted to your bike. Second, I love how I don't have to think about flipping any switches on the climbs or hitting any levers before a descent. The option is there to use override mode or manual mode, but in auto mode, you can just hop on your bike and the system works flawlessly as intended. So the last feature of Flight Attendant that I want to talk about that I've been kind of holding off on, and it's one that I've tinkered with probably the most since returning from Colorado, is the rider bias adjustment. Rider bias is a feature that lets you fine-tune Flight Attendant to favor either a more open compression position or a more locked compression position. The bias adjust is all about rider preference and what ride experience you are going for. Basically, when you toggle over to the rider bias adjustment, you have 5 positions you can set the fork in. A -2 and -1 bias are both favoring a more open compression position, with -2 being the position where the system will lean towards an open position the most often. The middle is a 0 bias, which is how the system comes stock. And then on the other end of the spectrum is a +1 and +2 bias position, which favor a more locked out compression position. +2 being the position that will make the system revert to being in the lock compression setting the most often. So I think what I've liked most about the bias adjustment is that it lets me, put in my preferences to match my riding for any given day. So for example, my kind of go-to rider bias is going to be a -1. So that is leaning a little bit more towards open compared to the stock 0 rider bias. And that is because I find that the 0 bias is just a hair too firm for my liking. In the -1 rider bias, the system is favoring open a little bit more. That for me has added a little bit more comfort when the terrain is a little bit more rocky, there's more impacts going on. Also provides a little bit more traction in tricky situations. But on the other end of that, on days where I'm going out and I want to be as efficient as possible, I want to be maximizing every pedal stroke, I'll ride with the bike in the +2 rider bias, which is making the system revert to being in the lock position as often as possible. So when we were in Colorado, we actually did kind of a small little control test to see if we could tell a difference between these different rider biases. So we picked, same section of trail, and we did it with Flight Attendant off. We did it in a rider bias of -2, and then a rider bias of +2. And just to kind of see, what the trek slash felt like with Flight Attendant not providing any assistance, and then also get a gauge on each extreme rider bias you can set the bike in.
Yeah, so this kind of section of trail, Joe did a ton of repeats on, just really trying to fine tune the algorithm. So we just did one lap through on kind of your guys' preferred bias setting. So now we'll do a couple more, one with the system off, so you can just kind of feel what the bike feels like without any assist. And then we'll probably do one in the plus bias settings, maybe +2, so you can really feel what the difference in efficiency is when the system's trying to get you into lock as often as possible.
Sweet, so we're at the top of a climb, and we're gonna do basically 3 different climbs in different modes on Flight Attendant to kind of try to feel the difference between a -2, the system off, and then a +2, and kind of just compare our thoughts on the trail and how each of those feel.
Yeah, I've been riding it on the rockier stuff in the 0 setting and the +1 today. And just turning it off, on this climb, it's kind of just a lot of little G-outs and stuff, pretty smooth for the most part, but noticed a bit more like a wall-y feeling. Kind of makes you realize how much travel the bike actually has, where I think before, didn't really notice it as much.
Yeah, so I would say that's my same impression. Like, this bike still pedals incredibly well, but
yeah,
there's a little bit more pedal bob. You notice like a little bit lack of efficiency, a little bit of an edge.
For sure.
Yeah, because I've been kind of the same. I've been riding it still pretty open, but you notice on this trail where it has the smoother, kind of more rolly sections that you're not getting that lockout assist. So.
Yeah, especially when you're sitting down, it's like a really big compression compared to something that might just hold you up. And,
yeah.
Scoot right along. So I'm sure it'll be good on the down, but definitely curious to see how it is with a little more assist on the down too, since it is so rolly.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have a little support, I'm sure.
So we just did another climb on the same trail in -2. So that's kind of the least amount of assistance, I guess you could say. It's going to tend to revert back to being open more than closed. I'd say my impressions are that just from kind of watching the lights and how they're lighting up, I was definitely in open most of the time, or the shock would be in pedal mode and the fork would be open. I think I was in lockout for like maybe 20 seconds total. It would take pretty small impacts and compressions to kind of immediately open it up, which, I think is nice if you're riding like really chunky rocky stuff where you're kind of wanting to max out traction. It'd be nice to kind of keep it open but still have a little bit of efficiency, but that was my take on it.
Yeah, same. I noticed it in that split mode a lot, where it'd be shock would be in pedal, fork was in open, which I thought was pretty comfortable. It's nice for running into stuff still, but then we kind of like more often than not reopen the rear shock to match the front. So
yeah, it almost reminded me as if like you had like a climb assist switch and you were like just kind of turning that on and off a lot. So there's still like a little bit of bob, but there's an added assistance to it. So
yeah, it was nice though. Like going from the system off to that was definitely still noticeable. Just yeah.
Still a small benefit, I would say. I don't really know when I probably wouldn't run it in that mode very often personally, but let's do the other end of the spectrum. We'll do +2 now, which is going to be leaning the most towards always going back to like a closed or locked out system. So let's do it. We just did +2. Let's comment on like the descent a little bit, just because it's going to be the most drastic feel. Even though everything, you're hitting compression, it's going to be opening up the system. But I know for me, like with how much kind of undulations that trail has, it was jumping towards pedal and lockout way more, which was awesome. Like I felt like I carried way more speed on that run, just going down, just cruising too.
Yeah, same. I noticed that it was using the split settings a lot more, but more on the pedal and the lock side.
Yeah.
Which didn't feel bad. I kind of noticed first rock garden it didn't open up as much, but noticed it carried a lot more speed through it, which
it's like a loss of comfort, but an increase in speed, which,
usually the way it goes.
Yeah, right. It's the way it goes. It lends towards like what somebody what their ride experience is they're going for.
Yeah, if you're really pushing, it seems beneficial.
Yeah.
Sure.
What'd you think on the climb back up compared to the other two settings we've done? Or off and, the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah, definitely more bias on the lock side, pedal, and felt like I rarely hit open, which, also makes sense. And then, kind of that pedal lock split a couple times maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed in, like, seated with the saddle up, a few kind of diving in and out of the hillside, we kind of like compressed. Just my rider weight would put the shock into, or I guess it would, open up the fork and put the shock into pedal. Yeah. But then it was so quick to get back to a lockout. Like that was the biggest, like the noticeable difference compared to like a -2. Is -2, it was just kind of design. It almost never was kind of getting me into lockout or even pedal really, and this was like pedal lockout almost the whole time.
Yeah, I noticed pedal quite a bit, which I really prefer.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that in my head pedaling up that if I were, to be riding somewhere that maybe you're just like on a fire road climb for like a real suspended period of time, and then you have a descent, I would put in +2 because I just want it to be able to grind and be the most efficient. Still think if, maybe you're riding a bit more chattery stuff, you're going to have a lot more feedback, but depends what you're going for.
Well, and that's where I think the override setting is really helpful is you can put it in just that pedal mode, which I found to be the most comfortable for pedaling. And even on some of the rockier descents we did, put it in the override mode and in the pedal position just to get a little more like support through kind of the pumping stuff. And then it's nice because you just barely hit the button and it's back to open or whatever setting you have it in, and whatever position it thinks you should be in. So
I know. I think for me, I'd almost leave it in the override just being in a lockout, just because I would rather it be doing its thing and thinking for me, and then the times that I want to like click it into a lockout, I have the option, but I don't really know when I'd be doing that, to be fair. I mean, maybe if I was riding a smaller bike where I'm going to be on the pedal sprinting it a bit more, but like on a bigger travel bike, I'm probably chasing gravity more often than not.
Yeah, it was more on the undulating stuff where it would kind of flip back and forth, which again isn't a bad thing, but I just kind of wanted like it to be just the same the whole way through to get a feel, and it felt good for that. But then as soon as it got gnarly, definitely wanted it to do its own thing in that situation.
Sweet. All right, so we've covered all of the details, the features, on-bike impressions of Flight Attendant. You might be wondering to yourself, where's the downside of this system? What are some of the drawbacks of running it? And to be fair, we've had a hard time finding things that have fallen short of Flight Attendant. But in the nature of a product review, I'm gonna do my best to pick out things that have kind of come up along the way that are worth noting. So the first kind of small little downside I've noticed is the LED lights that pulsate on the fork control module to indicate which compression position you currently are in. What I have found is that, because I'm riding an automatic suspension system, that its whole goal is to provide the most efficient suspension platform at any given time, is that I have the tendency to constantly be looking down at the fork control module to see what position I'm in. As an example, when you're riding and I'll hit a bump, I immediately look down to see, you know, oh, did it open the fork? Am I in pedal mode? Okay, it's opened the suspension. How quickly is it gonna go back to, you know, being in the locked position? This isn't maybe a phenomenon that will happen with everybody, and you know, RockShox definitely has thought of people like myself because they do offer a dark mode setting that you can access through the AXS App. Basically what that does is that instead of the green light constantly pulsating to indicate which compression setting you're in, instead the system will be dark, and once it changes compression positions, it'll only light up once to indicate that you have made a change. The very distinct noise of a AXS servo motor is something that if you've ever ridden, you know, a reverb dropper post or a AXS drivetrain, you are very familiar with. It's a very distinct noise when you shift gears or put your seat up. Well, now when you run Flight Attendant, that noise and how often it happens more than doubles. Every time the fork or the shock changes between one of those compression settings, you're gonna hear that same little servo motor changing between positions. Again, this isn't something that maybe is an issue to everybody out there. Personally, for myself, it's something that I don't really notice unless somebody else points out. There's been, you know, times in the last week's testing where people I'm riding with are like, man, that bike is making a lot of noise. And I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't really notice that. And then it starts playing in my ears more, and regardless, it's a small thing that I think for a lot of people, all the benefits you get with Flight Attendant will heavily outweigh it, but it's something to consider if you're looking at picking up a bike with it on it. And the last real drawback that I see with Flight Attendant is the fact that there is no aftermarket option to, you know, acquire the system. I feel super fortunate to have had the chance to spend some time riding Flight Attendant, and I'm admittedly bummed that, you know, I can't at some point go out and buy the system and put it on my personal bike. I think that this is gonna kind of limit who can actually get on the system, since it's obviously gonna be coming on, you know, manufacturers' top of the line mountain bikes. So what's the bottom line with RockShox's all-new automatic suspension platform, Flight Attendant? Flight Attendant is a system that undeniably makes a positive impact on the climbing efficiency of your mountain bike. The system is intuitive and exceeds at choosing the best suspension platform at any given moment. RockShox did a fantastic job packaging Flight Attendant into small, wireless components that add minimal weight to your bike and are easy to install and set up. The mixture of bike adjustments via the fork control module or the AXS app provide a variety of personalized fine-tuning opportunities. The only real downside we see right now is you'll only be able to try out Flight Attendant if you buy a bike that comes equipped with the system. But we wouldn't be surprised to see that change sometime down the road. So it's been an awesome opportunity to get a chance to test out RockShox's new Flight Attendant system. And I think I'm the most excited to see how mountain bikers around the world are receptive to this new technology. So with that said, go ahead and leave a comment below and let us know what you think about Flight Attendant. And for more information, you can head to vitalmtb.com for the full review.